Hello there. Thanks for taking the time to tune into this video. I do appreciate it. And today we're going to talk about five things that you never knew you needed while fly fishing. And be sure to stick to the end of the video because we're going to talk about a tip that it took me a lot of years to figure this out for myself. And just this basic little tip has made setup so much easier. And you've probably heard me talk about this before if you're familiar with my channel, and that is the third hand from OPROS. Now, once I got this accessory, it truly has been a game changer for me because now I can have a second setup with me at any point when I'm fly fishing. And to be able to quickly go from a nymph to a streamer to a dry fly without having to completely set up really is a wonderful thing. You could also use this as a resting place for your rod. So you no longer have to set your rod down on the ground, potentially getting sand and dirt on the reel, and God forbid, taking a step to the left or right and stepping on your rod. You can clip your rod right into this handy little device, and it's just great for carrying extra gear and keeping your gear off the ground. So, the second thing you never realized you needed, especially if you're somewhat new to fly fishing. Now, back in the day, we had to tie what's called a nail knot, right? Anytime that you tied a taper later to a floating line, you needed this tool to be able to do it, to have a nice seamless knot. Well, today, there are welded loops on most of the fly lines out there, so this particular tool has kind of gone to the wayside. But what happens, right, because it's going to happen, when that particular welded loop fails, you are going to need this particular tool. It's called a nail knot tool to be able to tie your leader to the floating line. Number 3. Now, this particular accessory, not everyone thinks about when they get a pair of forceps, right? Because typically you'll have a pair of forceps and you'll have a little nipper, a little cutter to cut your line so you're not using your teeth and making your dentist upset. You can actually get a pair of forceps that have cutters built in. And I recommend doing that because now you have a 2-in-1 tool and it's just a lot easier than having to search for one or the other. Number 4. So this took me a long time to discover because, one, the technology hasn't been out for a very long time, but it's now becoming more and more prevalent in fly fishing. And that is wading boots without laces. The new BOA system, you can trust these things, right? I've had a lot of feedback from a lot of people that have owned these. I just got my first pair from Corkers not very long ago, so I don't have time invested, but I've got friends that have used these for years without problems. No more wet type of laces. If you've ever tried to lace up your wading boots with wet laces, it's not a fun thing to do. They don't want to tighten, they bind, and then, God forbid, right, when it's time to take them off, it is not fun to try to take off wading boots with wet laces. I mean, especially in the wintertime or the fall months, your fingers are cold, the laces are cold, sometimes even freezing over. With this new BOA system, taking on and off your wading boots no longer is something that you have to mentally gear up for. It is super, super easy. So there's another accessory that you never knew that you needed until you have it. Number 5. Number 5 is a lanyard for your net. Now, I'm not talking the lanyards that are designed for a net because they don't work. Your net constantly pulls down that lanyard. Unless you have this tiny little net made out of paper mache, a regular lanyard, they don't work. So it took me a long time to figure out. I finally got a wading stick lanyard that has a lot more pulling power, and now my net stays securely on whatever it is that I am securing it on. And typically the wading stick lanyard is longer, so I've never had a problem with not having enough leash to net a fish. So use a wading stick lanyard, is that what they call them, right? A wading staff lanyard for your net. You're gonna have a much better experience. All right, and now, the tip of all tips, right? How many times have you just stringing up your rod, right? You got your reel on and now you got to bring the line and everything through the guides. Trying to take a piece of 5X, 9-foot, monofilament leader and stick it through the guides on your rod. How often have you missed a guide? I can tell you I have, until somebody just said, hey Dan, why don't you run the floating line, right? Just fold the floating line right before it ties to the leader or loops to the leader and bring that up through the guides. It's so much easier because your 9-foot leader just follows it right through. You have a much bigger piece of spaghetti to grasp onto as you're stringing up your fly rod. So I did a lot of years trying to do the monofilament way until somebody just said, hey Dan, why don't you try it this way? It's so much easier. And I'm like, light bulb moment. So much easier to string up your fly rod if you do it by the floating line and not the leader itself. So there's your tip of the day. So there are 5 things you never knew you needed for fly fishing. All right, everybody. And hey, if you're new to fly fishing and you need a little help with your fly fishing cast, check out this video right here. I put together an easy tutorial that once you're done watching, I bet you'll cast your fly rod just a little bit further. All right, everybody. Until the next time, fish on.